fellas, we've been talking a whole lot about Abraham Lincoln in our previous video, and now we need to talk about his wife, the famous, or I guess some would say infamous First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln. She's one of the most high-profile First Ladies in American history, and love her or hate her, you have to admit, she definitely changed not only the outlook of the culture surrounding the White House or the presidency, but the course of American and world history, just like her husband, because, there are some presidents and first ladies, you can't disentangle them. And Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd are very much that way. That's why I call them the Obamas of the 19th century, because you can't tell one of their stories without the others. And you see that reflected in their astrological charts, which we will get to in a moment. So Mary Todd Lincoln was born Mary Todd. She was born to a very wealthy family in Lexington, Kentucky. And at that time, Lexington, Kentucky was called the Athens of the West. And it was a place where people would actually, more wealthy families moving into the Midwest would send, more affluent families would send their children to these upstanding academic organizations. And one of those was called Madame Mendel's French School for Girls. And that is the one that Mary Todd attended, which her family paid for. And this became a hallmark in Mary Todd Lincoln's life and in her astrological natal chart. Because unlike many women of her day, she was very well educated, not just for a woman, but for a man as well. It was also kind of unusual that her and Abraham Lincoln got together, because back during those days, men usually chose women that had less education with them, because men were viewed as the head of the family. So it was very interesting that Abe, being an Aquarian man, would be like, this is the Sagittarian gal I want, and not despite her education, but because of it. Like, he wanted a woman who would speak her mind. He wanted a woman who was intelligent. He wanted a woman who thought for herself. And that's what he got. And so immediately you see this kind of unusual romantic dynamic between these two. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So Mary Todd was born to Robert Todd and Elizabeth Ann Parker Todd in a 15-bedroom mansion in Lexington, Kentucky. And Mary Todd's background could not have been more different from Abe's. Because, as we all know, Abe was born dirt poor, and he was dirt poor when he met Mary Todd Lincoln. Well, to be Mary Todd Lincoln, I should say. And on another note, her family were wealthy planters, and they owned slaves, though Mary Todd Lincoln, when she grew up, was vehemently against that practice. And so you once again see this kind of reverse dynamic of men and women during that time. Men would, very rarely marry women which they viewed beneath, above their social standing or with more education. But Abe liked that. He wanted that. And that's immediately setting up this unusual dynamic for that time. And I'd even say for this time between them, that was very interesting. So the thing that I believe subconsciously brought them together, and I think kind of they trauma bonded over this, was the death of their mothers. Their moms died when they were very young. Abe's died when he was 9, and Mary Todd's mother, Elizabeth Parker, died when she was 6 years old. And so I call Abe and Mary Todd like the Obamas of the 19th century, but they were more like the Warrens of the 19th century, because they were kind of living out the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren from The Conjuring, because at that time when Elizabeth Ann Parker died, that is kind of when Mary Todd's, I guess, psychic medium powers activated. More on that in a little bit. So she got this education from Madame Mental's French school for girls. She learned all these languages. So I don't think I have to tell you that she was a Sagittarian woman. Okay, she was born on December 13th, a Sagittarius sun. But she also had Mars in Sagittarius. You know who else has Mars in Sagittarius? Freaking Stella Gibson does. Okay, so let's look at Mary Todd's astrological natal chart. Why not? So we see her as a Virgo rising, Libra and Scorpio in her first and second houses, the house of self, possessions, land, things you want, self-worth. And we immediately see this dynamic in Mary Todd's life of her kind of being born in the lap of luxury, being destined to be a Southern Belle debutante, and her just going against all of that. We see her Mars in Sagittarius in the third house, the house of communication, early childhood, siblings. More on that in a minute. And it is square to her Saturn in Pisces. So, and her sun and Uranus is also square to Saturn, and Saturn in her sixth house, the house of daily practices, health, etc. So we kind of have this expectation, this from her father, her mother, her family being in Saturn in the sixth house, square to her drive, her ambition, her Mars, her sun, herself, her ego. And it was this square that challenged her until her dying day. But in leaning into being herself, she actually gained more power and influence than she could ever have following this role as like this submissive Southern lady. So, in 1839, Mary Todd was at the house of her sister in Springfield, Illinois, which is where she moved after she graduated Madame Mental's academy. And they were at a party, and she was at the home of her sister, Elizabeth Edwards, and her husband, also a very affluent family. Her husband was a former governor of Illinois. And she met this lanky, tall drink of water named Abraham Lincoln, and he walked up to her with I think the best pickup line in the history of romance, and he said, "Would you like to dance with me in the worst way possible?" And I can't think of a more Aquarian way to flirt than that. And she fell for it. It worked. He hooked her. So immediately you see that bond between Sagittarius and Aquarius. So they hit it off, but it was kind of a Romeo and Juliet type romance. You had the boy from the wrong side of the railroad tracks, you had the girl from the right side of the railroad tracks. Her sister, who was her legal guardian at that time, and her husband was her mentors, and she was their ward, and they kind of forbid the courtship. So Mary Todd was a very good looking lady. She was a redhead, she was rich, she was young, you know, she came from a super wealthy family. So she had a ton of suitors. And one of them was Abraham Lincoln's political rival, Stephen A. Douglas. And I cannot think of a more awkward situation than this. Because in 1858, during this very tawdry love triangle between Abe, Mary Todd Lincoln, and Stephen Douglas, they had 7 public debates for the incumbent of the Illinois State Senate, of which Stephen A. Douglas was serving as the incumbent. And I always wanted to hear those debates. Like, how did Abe clap back at Stephen A. Douglas? Stephen A. Douglas was like, blah, 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 blah. And then Abe Lincoln was like, yeah, and I slept with your girlfriend, because she's my wife now. Like, I mean, how would you recover from that? And apparently, Stephen Douglas did not. So, I also want to say how Abe had a type. Because during this time, he noticed Mary Todd getting very flirtatious and friendly with Stephen Douglas, and they broke up. And it was an epic breakup. If Taylor Swift had been alive back then, she would have written a song about it. That's how epic this was. In fact, Abe called it the fatal 1st of January. I mean, Abe, we all know you're kind of a drama queen, okay? It was the fatal 1st of January, 1841. And then Abe went off and got another redhead. It was kind of like Scott Summers marrying Madeline Pryor. He got with this girl named Matilda. She was a redhead. She looked just like Mary Todd. And you know, like Scott Summers in X-Men, anytime he went out with his friends, they were like, hey, Abe, you know that girl looks just like Mary. And he's like, shut up. So then he broke up with Matilda, and he and Mary Todd started seeing each other again in secret. Her sister and her brother-in-law forbade the courtship. But on November 4th, 1842, Abraham and Mary were married in secret. Okay? And at that point, the family was like, oh, hell, do whatever you want, you crazy kids. We can't stand in your way. And so they were wed. And it became one of the most famous political marriages, I think, in not just American history, but in world history. And not just because that this couple was leading the country during the most bloody conflict in American history, the American Civil War. They were also just really damn weirdos. And when I say they were made for each other, it was like, I don't think anyone else could be weirder than the other. And that is so how Aquarius and Sagittarius get together. So I'm an Aquarius rising, and my man has a sun in Sagittarius, and that's how we are. We're both just weirdos. And that's why Aquarius and Sagittarius get along. And I think also Pisces. We'll get to that in a minute. Mary Todd had a lot of placements in Pisces, because they both were weirdos. So here's a little window into their married life. Abe loved cats. He adopted like 15. He would take strays in off the street. And at that time, it wasn't called the Lincoln bedroom. It was just his office. And all of his cats would be in there while he penned the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address. He also had a dog named Fido. And I cannot think of a more Aquarian thing than being both a dog and a cat person. That's what Abe was. So, you know, he was a weirdo. But Mary also a giant damn weirdo. So it was at this point that Abe had been elected to the presidency, and the story of him being elected is so sweet. There were no telephones back then. I don't think I have to tell you that. In the 1860s, so Abe went running home to Mary, and he shouted, "Mary, Mary, we're elected president." And I thought, isn't that a hallmark to their relationship, of being on this very unusual but kind of equal dynamic, especially back then? That's pretty cute. So they had a very turbulent marriage, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was marked by verbal and sometimes physical abuse from Mary to Abe. And I'm not defending that. That's really shitty of her. But it was also a marriage that was very high profile, and it marked out that time in American history by these two people. So at this point, Mary Todd Lincoln has lost a lot. She's lost her mother. At this point, her father has died, and her youngest son, Eddie, has died unexpectedly at the age of 3. And back then, I don't think I have to tell you, child life expectancy was pretty low. Most kids didn't live past their first year. There were no vaccines. People barely washed their damn hands. So yeah, kids died very young in very weird and mysterious ways back then. So it was at this point that Mary Todd leaned, I guess, into what you would call her psychic abilities. Because she would start hosting seances in the Red Room of the White House. And it's not that Red Room from Twin Peaks. But every time I hear this story, this is what I see. I just expect Dale Cooper to come wandering in at any moment while the Lincolns are having their weird-ass Red Room White House seance and be like, hey guys, I've been stuck here for 30 years, you know, looking for poor Annie. So, I always expect like Mary Todd to be like, "You're not my son. You're not my dead son. You're a strange looking man from the future." So, at that point, Mary Todd Lincoln started getting these mediums to come to the White House. And the most famous of these were known as the Witches of Georgetown, Margaret, Anne, and Belle Laurie. And they were known for levitating pianos. I don't know really what that has to do with like channeling the dead, but I guess they were like a jack of all trades, whatever. I don't really know how mediums work, so I guess you can levitate pianos and channel the dead. Anyway, I don't know. So, the Lauries came and they started having seances trying to channel Mary Todd's dead children, because at this point, her next youngest son, Willie, had died of typhoid fever very unexpectedly at the age of 11. And this left Mrs. Todd with just a broken heart and almost a broken mind. Now, a lot of people judge Mary Todd Lincoln, and I do too, because she was abusive and toxic towards her husband, and that's totally not cool. And yes, I will judge her about that. But people judged her, I believe, unfairly for her interest in seances and mediumship and the supernatural and channeling the dead. And I'm like, but if you had lost 3 of your 4 children at this point, oh yes, her son Ted had died also, leaving only Robert as the only survivor of their children, what wouldn't you do? I mean, I've been through a lot of heartache in the past 7 years, and my entire outlook spiritually has changed. I don't see how you couldn't. So if this woman was turning to mediumship and seances just to channel her heart and mind-crushing grief, I don't think she should be judged for that. Now, were these people cheats and swindlers and wanting to bilk Mrs. Lincoln? I believe yes. Another one was called Nettie Colburn Maynard, and she gave a very famous seance in April of 1863, and she was trying to channel the Lincolns' dead son Willie. And it was said that it was very cold in the room, the candles flickered a lot, and there was a consistent tapping. And at that point, Mrs. Maynard kept calling on the spirits to show themselves, and Abe famously said, "If the spirits will not come forth, then I must release them." And he let off probably the most famous fart in American history. Which again is such an Aquarius thing, to fart during a seance. Let's all be real. Aquarians would do that. So, Abe, though, wasn't completely against the seances, which is also interesting. He didn't just dismiss his wife as being crazy when she did this. And I think it began as him wanting her to use this as a maybe kind of a healthy way to channel her grief, but Abe was also channeling grief. And I think they did this together. Again, that Sagittarius and Aquarius being both really weird together. Or as they say in Adventure Time, I hope you're happy being crazy together. That's how I always see Aquarius and Sagittarius. So, over the years, Mary and Abraham Lincoln would have up to 8 seances in the Red Room of the White House, most of them during the time of the American Civil War. And during these seances, Mary did see her dead children. She said, Willie, her second eldest son, Willie lives. He comes to me every night and stands at the foot of the bed with the same sweet, adorable smile that he always has had. He does not always come along. Little Eddie, his younger brother, who perished before him at the age of 4, is sometimes with him. So, I have a theory that these grifters kept coming to Miss Lincoln, and they weren't honest mediums, and they could not actually channel the dead, and that she was actually the one doing it. It was kind of a bed knobs and broomsticks type, Angela Lansbury, David Tomlinson type situation. But one of the most famous was William Mumler, and this was after Mary Todd's husband was brutally assassinated before her very eyes in the Ford Theater, holding her husband's hand. Now, prior to this, Abe had visions of his own death. So I think both of them were a little psychic. Abe famously had a premonition of his assassination in the Ford Theater, to the point he almost didn't go. But it took someone telling him not to go that made him want to go more. So that's, again, such an Aquarius thing. You're not going to tell an Aquarius what to do. If you tell them what to do, they'll do the opposite thing. So maybe that's what got him assassinated. So, after he was assassinated, Mrs. Lincoln kind of did a nosedive into the mediumship and seances because this woman was broken by grief. And I cannot stress that enough. Okay, when you're broken by grief, you'll do just about anything. You're desperate. Okay? So she went to this guy, and his name was William Mumler, and he was a spiritual photographer, and he said he could get photographs of the dead. And he was a known con, to the point that P.T. damn Barnum sued this guy. The Lincoln story is just a weird-ass rabbit hole. So William Mumler, quote, in giant scare quotes, photographed the dead ghost of Abraham Lincoln hovering over his wife, laying his arms on her. Very, very, Patrick Swayze, Whoopi Goldberg from the movie Ghost. It's what it's giving right here. And, again, is this a fake? Probably. But, while William Mumler was a fake, was Mary Todd Lincoln? Well, we don't know that. I mean, she could have been bipolar, which is what many historians believe. And, I mean, the milk sickness that took so many people from the Midwest during the time her and Abe were courting. Was she really seeing her dead mother, or was it the hallucinations from the milk sickness? It's kind of like that X-Files episode where Eddie gets that homicidal tattoo voiced by Jodie Foster. And you're like, is the Jodie Foster tattoo really trying to kill Scully, or is it the ergot root? We don't know. Also, I always wonder, why didn't Scully's snake tattoo come to life and try to kill people? Like, it'd be so funny at the end of Never Again when Mulder's, like, slut-shaming Scully, like he always does, if that snake just fucking jumped out of her ass and bit him. So, all of this might seem pretty damn crazy to you, and it is! It's nuts! But I also want to say, I want to read from an article I found that I really love. And, it is called, this article is called Seances in the Red Room. How Spiritualism Comforted the Nation During and After the Civil War. And this is on the White House Historical Association page. Now, in this article is by Alexandra Kommel, an undergraduate from American University. And she talks about how these seances and mediumships and channeling the dead might sound very silly and offbeat to us today, because we view death in a very different way from how people viewed it back then, and how the Civil War changed the nation's perception of death. Because prior to that, people usually died at home, so death was very visible. People saw a body. They could grieve. They knew the closure. They knew what happened to their loved one, and yet it was hard, but they could move on because the mystery wasn't there. The Civil War changed all of that. Back then, the dead were not even usually documented on the battlefield. So, I think of the scene in the book Gone with the Wind, and there's a kid who comes upon Tara on his way home, and he gets sick with a fever, and he dies, like a lot of people did back then. And it always cuts to his mom in Florida looking for her son, and he just never came home. She never knew what became of him. And the family didn't even know who he was. He was unconscious when his comrade brought him to Tara. So they're like, we don't even know who he is. And they bury him in the family cemetery. If you go through a lot of cemeteries in the South, where I live, There's a nearby town about 45 minutes from us, and there's a whole section of the old cemetery in the town dedicated to these mystery soldiers. No one knew who they were. No one knew where they come from. At some points, people didn't even know what side they were on. Were they Union or Confederate? They were just young boys who died in such a brutal and terrible way, and the town was like, we have to give them the best burial we know how, and they had no way of contacting their families. So this changed America's entire outlook on death. Mothers were made widows, children were made orphans, mothers were made mourners overnight, and they never got closure, sometimes never at all, about how their kids, their brothers, their fathers, their siblings died. So many people turn to spiritualism and mediumship and seances to at least try to find some closure with their dead loved ones. So when this photo of Mumler came out, people widely accepted it, even though it was kind of obviously fake. And this article by Alexandra Kamal, I think, illustrates it perfectly. And I'm going to read some of her article. It's excellent. Look it up on the White House Historical Association's page. It's really good. It says that the nation fought so hard to hold on to Lincoln's ghost because he represented the idea of a spirit coming home and looking over its family from above. During a time when so many families had lost fathers and sons, it was comforting to know that the father of the nation was still looking over them as well. Hearing stories of Lincoln's ghost gave these families hope that their own fallen father figure were also looking over them as well. Moreover, his ghost demonstrated that he and the soldiers who perished in battle were able to find comfort despite the circumstances of their untimely deaths. So that really puts it into perspective. It wasn't just Mary who was desperate and searching for closure about the deaths of her loved ones. It was the entire nation. I don't think one family was untouched by the war. If they hadn't lost a loved one, they absolutely knew someone who had. So Mary was committed to an insane asylum by her son Robert, which was a dick move by Robert. God damn, buddy. You were her only surviving child and you did this to her. But she eventually got free of the asylum and traveled Europe with her sister until her health failed, and she returned to live in Springfield, Illinois, in the same house where she met her fated husband. And in 1871, she passed away as being one of the most controversial first ladies in American history, and I think one of the most controversial figures in world history. Her and her husband changed the course of not just American history, but world history. And this very much shows her sun in opposition to her moon. Her sun in the 4th house, the house of family, early childhood, home, mother, completely opposite her moon in Gemini, in the 10th house, the house of seriousness and hardassery and iron-fistedness. Oppositions are a challenging aspect, but they're also a mirror aspect. And again, even unto her death, Mary was bucking the trend of what life had always planned for her as a Southern debutante, going about it in her own way and finding influence, power, and even infamy by doing it her own way. And that is the true soul of a Sagittarian woman. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this weird ass power couple pop culture astrological natal chart reading of I think the first American president first lady power couple. They were the Lorraine and Ed Warren of the White House. Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln, 5 ever guys. Aquarius and Sag. We love to see it. We'll see you guys later. We love you. Y'all have a good one.